Chase Garbarino, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
John, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the Boston area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the changing nature and role of the HR manager and how HR needs to be responding to the shifting nature of work, especially in more hybrid and remote work cultures. As we get started, I wanted to share Chase's bio with everybody. Chase Garbarino is the co-founder and CEO of HQO. Previously, Chase was the co-founder and CEO of how do you say that? American
Inno.
Okay. American Inno. Previously, Chase was the co-founder and CEO of American Inno, where he helped build a local media network for the innovation economies in over a dozen U.S. cities. In 2012, the company was purchased by ACBJ, a subsidiary of Advanced Publications. Chase is an avid Boston sports fan and runner, as well as a washed-up college basketball player. He enjoys spending non-work time with his wife and sons. He holds a BA from Hamilton College. And where did you play college ball?
I was at Hamilton when I played. It's a little D3 school in upstate New York.
Sweet. Mm-hmm. You know, my experience in playing with college players on a few occasions is even the worst among them are heads and shoulders above anywhere I will ever be. So
that might have been the case for me at one point, but I was playing in a men's league not long ago, and we got run off the court by a bunch of 18-year-olds in college. So we aren't what we once were.
Yeah, and I have to remind myself, because mentally I'm still like early 20s, you know, in terms of my physical abilities, but I'm now early to mid 40s, and so it doesn't actually work out that way when I'm actually trying to push myself.
It's tough when that reality sets in. I'm 37. It hit me that the basketball game changed, where now I'm kind of backing the ball up the court a lot more than I used to, preserving.
That's right. Well, we're not going to talk about basketball, but it's fun to learn that little tidbit about you, and it's great to have a chance to chat with you. As we get started, is there anything else you would like to share with listeners about your background, your personal context, anything about your story before we launch on into the conversation?
No, I mean, I think the kind of theme of my co-founders and I, like, we've been working together for a little over 15 years. The things that we built are all very different industries and businesses. Obviously, they're all technology, but the kind of theme has been this like local community aspect. So American Inno is very much about helping bolster innovation economies outside of the Bay Area. So it's now kind of local community platforms to really drive innovation in all markets. When we got out of college in 2007, obviously we were heading into the financial recession and the financial crisis. And we're saying, what's going to happen is entrepreneurs are going to pull us out of this. And how do you kind of bring people together and develop skills and learning in a way that the rising tide lifts all boats in kind of local communities, which I think is where our conversation today is going to be so relevant for HR managers in terms of, what their job needs to look like and be successful. And obviously how we've transitioned into HQO has been really centered around kind of the physical workplace, enabling ultimately great employee experience. And the physical workplace is lots of different places. It's not just the office, but there is kind of a common theme. If somebody were to look at American Inno and HQO, they probably think they're very different, but we've been pretty obsessive about how local kind of community can drive economic progress, which we think is just a very worthy cause.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's start at like the 80,000 foot view here and talk about leaders generally in this remote world, this hybrid world. Clearly over the last couple of years, organizations and leaders have had to grapple with the harsh reality that whether you like it or not, you're going to have to learn how to do remote successfully. And as COVID started to subside and people became more vaccinated and safe and just not as concerned about health risks and concerns, more people started to return to work. But the genie was out of the bottle. People didn't want to fully come back. And that's where all the conversation around hybrid work was really born. Now it's not new. People have had hybrid work arrangements for decades. They've had remote work arrangements for decades. But given the last couple of years, we've just been accelerated into that kind of new reality. And there's just better technologies now than there were even a decade ago to facilitate it. But with all of that, one of the reasons why many leaders have been trying to push their people back into the physical office is because they're not sure what to do about culture, team building, onboarding, like some of those types of things that traditionally have been done person to person, and they're not sure how to do it and establish and maintain and sustain a healthy workplace culture when people are scattered and distributed all over the place. Who knows where they are, right? And so what are those biggest challenges, and how can leaders generally start to face those as, we're now thankfully coming out of the pandemic, and we're starting to ease into a new kind of a normal situation. What are those challenges, and how can we address them?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is, and everyone talks about this, right? Like, how do you return people to office? And I think it's the wrong question, right? Like, returning to office is kind of putting one foot in front of the other and going back to the office. And I think what people are grappling with is much more a leadership question than it is about physically commuting back to the office, right? Like, everybody knows how to go back to the office. It's not like that has been dramatically changed. I think what has dramatically changed is we had this very, unfortunate set of circumstances. Obviously, the pandemic, everything about it was very unfortunate. But we had this kind of black swan event that ushered in if we were to test the value of the physical workplace, how do you do that? Well, you need a massive control group not working in the physical workplace, right? And so for a very long time, I think both real estate and HR folks, it was like when you ask them about, how do you measure the value of this expense, which is number two to people is number one, and then real estate oftentimes is number two on your P&L in terms of dollars spent. I don't know, you just need an office, right? Like there wasn't sophisticated metrics around how it really impacts people, right? Unless you are literally a storage space, the only reason that the real estate, the physical real estate of the workplace is valuable is that it serves people. So we've had this fascinating kind of scrutiny on, well, what is the value of the physical workplace? And I think what we're seeing is you kind of get these anecdotes on both sides, right? They're not very data driven, where on one side you have a certain set of employees that are saying, well, I'm more productive because I save time commuting and I'm not bothered and I can get my work done. And then on the other side, you kind of have certain people in management leadership saying like, collaboration and spontaneous interaction, right? Like those are kind of the two sides shouting at each other. And I think the fascinating opportunity in all of this is for, the employee experience to kind of take a step back and truly map out what are the activities that not just an individual employee needs to do, but how we work together, right? So when we talk to our clients and when we talk to our own employees, we say like, you might feel more productive in a lot of ways in terms of like banging out emails and doing some of the things that you really need to do in the form of like concentration work when you're isolated. But what that lacks is the context of you're a really important person to everyone else at the company. Your work impacts other people in ways that you might not necessarily know. And what that comes down to is empathy, right? And as you know, technology makes it a lot harder to empathize with people when you're with them in person. And you hear it, like the first time somebody goes back to a conference after, being away from it from COVID, they're kind of like, oh, I kind of forgot about, like, it's great to, engage, but it's still all anecdotal, right? And then on the management side, we've been doing a bunch of things because Henry Ford a very long time ago said we needed to work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, because that's what made a ton of sense for the assembly line. But like, that was just the way that, like, there was a one size fits all model for work, which in this day and age makes no sense. And so from a data perspective, we now have the technology to quantify much more data with regards to how does the physical workplace really impact the things that are critical to HR, right? In terms of employee engagement, satisfaction, production, retention. So it's still kind of the first inning of the game, to use a sports analogy, but I think you're starting to see this collision of the workplace and HR really start to become data driven. And I think what we're going to learn over the next several years is just how impactful our physical environment is on influencing our behavior. And we're going to be much more scientific about it than, it's been very much art versus science for a very long time.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. And there's no doubt that data analytics and assessment has been high on people's mind, but many really struggle with even really understanding how to do that, right? So assuming they even know how, like what kind of data they should be collecting, they don't really know how to analyze it. And if they know how to analyze it, they don't really know how to even do anything meaningful with it. And,
Sure.
and so there's all these hurdles to being able to gather and then understand the data to make those kind of data-driven decisions. But with continuously improving HRIS systems and people analytics approaches and softwares, and just the attention that people are giving to everything you were just talking about, I think that's going to move the needle. And we're just not taking for granted, what we did in the past. Like we assumed all these things were necessary, and after a couple of years of this, we realized, well, I'm not sure it really was necessary. We really need to take a closer look, and so I think that's all very healthy. One thing that is for sure is many people have just felt their lives, their careers, and the way they work disrupted over the last couple of years. And as evidence of this, we find ourselves in what people have called the Great Resignation, the Great Reawakening, the Great Reevaluation, whatever you want to call it. People taking a good hard look and saying, I'm not sure I actually want to do those things I used to do. Maybe I want to go try something else, start my own business, do gig work, go to a different company, start a different career, whatever. People are really thinking long and hard about all of that. So that only adds to the complexity of the situation and the uncertainty for organizations as they're grappling to attract and retain good talent, and enter HR managers, HR leaders. And they've been leaned on heavily over the last couple of years, especially over the last year or so, in this space to try to figure things out on the people side to make sure organizations have, their number one asset, the people, to be able to do and accomplish what they need to do. So how do you see the role of the modern HR manager shifting in this new remote or hybrid kind of a work culture? And how, as those roles are shifting, what new roles are emerging?
Yeah, well, I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head, where for a very long time now, even before COVID, but COVID just exacerbated this trend, right? More and more required skills and responsibilities are getting piled on this concept of the HR manager. And when you really take a step back and look at what your average HR manager is responsible for, you're like, man, they really need to break this into more and more roles, right? Like it is getting so complex, and so much of the burden of the organization is now being put on HR, right? Like HR for 50 years was always kind of seen as like administrative in a lot of ways, and it's become like the most strategic thing across all industries more and more. And it's a great thing for HR professionals because the chief people officer has now been a trend for a while. But when you start to think about the opportunity and the professional opportunities within the HR department, it's becoming so multivariate that it's an exciting space to go into. And where I think the most exciting opportunity is kind of on this like consumerization of employment, right? It's becoming an experience to work somewhere, and talent expects experience. And so when you look at the most sophisticated HR departments, they truly are mapping the experience of an employee the way that Disney World maps your experience in terms of like as a customer at Disney World. And it's a wildly different skill set than certain other things that you need to do within HR that are not, I'm not diminishing those things critical to keep the business running, but it's just this whole new kind of value driver, where if you can really design this phenomenal life cycle of an employee, number one, you drive more productivity from an employee. And number two, particularly for the right kind of employees that are a fit for the company, what you end up seeing is that their satisfaction goes up, and typically you're going to get retention. And the ROI on the cost of employee productivity and retention is as clear as day. So while it's a new cost for sure in terms of like really being kind of thoughtful about the employee experience, the ROI is there. And so I think that's like this new category when you think about like someone who's really thinking through the experience of what's it like, the first touch point I have as a prospect through my interview process, whether I get the job or not, what's the experience in terms of how I hear back from the company, to my pre-onboarding to onboarding. Like the sophistication around the employee journey is really exciting. And I just think what's really cool is when you see somebody who's really passionate about their work. And when you think about employee experience, if we have more people creating a great experience that put people into a position to be passionate about their work, that's a really good thing for the world, in my opinion. So that's kind of the area of HR that I'm really fascinated with. And I think there's just a ton of opportunity for both industry veterans as well as, young people trying to forge a path in HR to kind of double down and come in and think through the skill sets and help write the playbook on this, right? It's very much still up in the air, and kind of forge a path within the category.
Yeah, I love that. And organizations have been talking about customer experience and user experience for a really long time. We're finally talking more and more about the employee experience. That's super important and necessary. And you just articulated why very, very well. And what still boggles my mind, though, is even in this tight labor market, even though there's so much conversation around employee experience, I still see it constantly. I mean, literally all the time, I'm seeing just horrendous examples of organizations and what they're doing or not doing. That's creating a really, negative, if not toxic, kind of employee experience. And it really does blow my mind. Because some of these things that we can do to create a more positive employee experience are super simple. It's not rocket science. You just do some simple things and you're like better than, I don't know, 75% of the companies that are out there. And so let's talk about what some of those things are that leaders generally, but HR professionals specifically, can do to improve the employee experience so that they can attract and retain top talent in this really tight labor market.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy one that it's kind of low hanging fruit because of just how much people talk about it in market. But let's start with this whole return to office concept, because everyone's talking about it and nobody knows how to do it. One of the things that I've seen where a lot of executive teams are falling down is that they're just having very different conversations behind closed doors than they are kind of with their employee base, right? And you touched on it kind of at the top of the podcast here, which is like we're in a much safer place than we were 2 years ago with regards to COVID, and because of great scientific work, progress should continue there, which is a great thing. So you always have to be mindful about safety with regards to the workplace, but since that seems to be getting better, when you're talking about bringing people back, I've seen this kind of dichotomy. It's like a barbell effect where you have people on both ends and no one in the middle, where you have some groups just saying like, we're going to completely back away. Like we believe in bringing people together in certain ways, but we're just afraid to tell our employees what to do. And then you have kind of the other like carrot versus stick, where the stick is like, get your ass back in the office. Why? Cause like, that's not a good reason. Like I have a 3.5-year-old and 1.5-year-old. And when I tell them to do something because it doesn't work with them, right? Like, so it's going to be hard where with regards to talent that has a lot of optionality on where to work. Like that's, it's not the best strategy. And then I talk to like a lot of these executive teams, and they've got really thoughtful reasons as to why they believe in their people coming back together. And very few of them are like, I need them in first thing Monday, last thing Friday, but there needs to be much more kind of honest dialogue and context around the why of why you believe in working together, like working as a team, caring about the development of employees, right? It's really hard to develop in isolation by yourself in your house, right? Like there's a lot of really kind of pro-employee reasons to help bring people back together while also being mindful about flexibility. And I think using tools that kind of consistently communicate and try to bring friction out of the employees' experience on coming back to the office is important. And then I think one of the other fascinating things just in overall employee experience is the way that we operate. And you touched on, we've been doing customer experience for a really long time. We don't kind of sit back and like let these really long periods of time, like good companies don't let these long periods of time go in between, making sure that we're servicing the customer, making sure that they're satisfied and happy. And when you look at kind of the employee experience situation right now, it's like, all right, once a year, we're going to send you this like hour-long burdensome survey that even when you just think about the bias of filling out a survey, you're like, well, I have to stop and think about all these things that might have happened 9 months ago or whatever. Like what we need to be doing is getting into this much kind of tighter, there's ways to collect passive data on the employee experience throughout the workday and the work week that can feed in, a constant feedback loop. As an employee, if I had something happen to me in February and I'm filling out my survey in December, like the time to action on that has passed, right? So I think really starting to treat the employee like the customer service departments do, where you have these really tight KPIs and metrics on here's an issue, here's how we resolve it, right? IT departments at a lot of companies are doing this well, but IT is one tiny sliver of the overall employee experience. So I think centralizing, and what you're going to start to see is more and more of this kind of central employee experience team where we're kind of actioning off of very similar KPIs to customer experience KPIs in terms of time to resolution and satisfaction and things like that, that I think is really exciting. And some of the best companies are already starting to do this.
Yeah. Excellent. Chase, it has just been a pleasure. I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in a minute, but this has been a fascinating conversation. We've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to say here, and I'd love to have you back anytime and we can continue the conversation. Before we close for today.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'll take you up on that. Before we close for today, though, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you, find out more about your company, your team, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, so you can find me at cgarb on Twitter, and our company is HQO, so hqo.co, C-O. We're a workplace experience software company. And I think the final word today is really putting the full life cycle of employee and employee experience first, and figuring out what the right tools are for their week, kind of the week in the life of an employee, and being very kind of deliberate about driving up that employee NPS.
I love it. Thank you, Chase. It's been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Chase and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.